Simplex IT CEO Bob Coppedge returns in a laugh-filled episode as we discuss news from Gradient MSP, a sleeper story about Nodeware and SockSoda, Microsoft NCE, and more. Plus, a special guest interview with GTDC CEO Frank Battagliano on trends in distribution. It's ChannelPro Weekly number 215, not for Larry. Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly episode 215. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, and your host of this fine show for those out there who are like you, and that means you're an MSP, you're an IT integrator, you're a VAR, you're a IT consultant, you're generally a human being, although we do cater to our alien audience as well. But we appreciate all who join us each and every week and are excited that you're here. We've got a great show lined up for you. We've got an awesome guest host. We've got a really good interview coming up. Lots of good stories to talk about. I'm super excited. But first, we've got to introduce the man of the hour, the man who helps the trains run on time here at ChannelPro. He is the executive editor, Mr. Rich Freeman. Welcome, Rich.
So the program is mostly for humans, but I'm a chatbot. Should I stick around?
So this is the bot version of Rich Freeman. So we're going to expect lots of updates in terms of our grammar while we're going through the episode as well. But yes, we do enjoy artificial intelligences as well as aliens. We do have some animal listeners. My cat, for example, is a huge fan of the show. Usually pops in my office each and every time we record. So pretty exciting stuff having such a diverse audience, Rich.
Indeed. Yeah. 4 legs, 2 legs. It's all good.
It's all good. How many legs? You tell. How many legs do you have, folks? Pop into the comments area. Send us an email, podcast@channelpronetwork.com.
And pseudopods are also welcome.
Pseudopods, right? The legless and the single-celled organisms. We want everybody emails now. Everybody has a smartphone. Let's just hear from everybody. Podcast@channelpronetwork.com. Let us know. Leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. That's what we want to see. we are quickly barreling out of control. I will also say too that is part of because of our guest host, and we'll get to him in just a moment. But Rich, how's your week going? What's going on?
Week's going great. Yeah. And this is actually the last week at home for the extended period. I haven't been out on the road since November, at least on business. I did a little vacation travel in there, but back out on the road for an event next week, and then home, and then away, and that kind of rhythm is starting up again soon.
Excellent. So our viewers can look forward to seeing you in different locales over the next few weeks and months as we go into event season. So very, very exciting. Where will Rich be, folks? You'll just have to tune in each and every week to find out. But speaking of events, we got one of those coming up here pretty soon. Rich, tell us about that.
Yeah, and it is about 3 weeks away, a little less than 3 weeks away. And by the time people are hearing this episode, it'll be closer to 2 than 3. And that is in Newark, New Jersey. It is the first of 6 face-to-face, in-person regional events that we'll be doing around the US of A this year in 2022. And we are super excited about all of them. We're going to be talking about all the stuff that you want us to talk about with you. Cybersecurity and just interesting stories about things that have gone wrong, could go wrong, and how to prevent them from affecting you the way they have other people in this industry and beyond. We're going to be talking about making money with Microsoft Azure, because I'm guessing close to 100% of the people listening or watching right now are doing Microsoft Cloud business, but maybe still trying to figure out where is that larger opportunity around Azure. We'll get some real life case studies on that. Everybody knows how painful it is hiring right now and how important retention is. So we have a session dedicated to that topic, and just to keep it fun, we're going to present it sort of like a game show, sort of like the dating game. How do you woo and win that job candidate you're trying to bring in? So lots and lots of great stuff. We have a phenomenal hands-on sort of working lab on social media selling that's going to be led by the folks at JS Group, Janet Shine's organization. They're going to send you home not just with some thoughts and ideas and whiteboard stuff, but you'll actually have gotten hands-on kind of thinking your way through a social selling strategy. So you're not going to want to miss this, folks. First one of the year is in Newark on March 9th. Wednesday, March 9th, and then later on in the year, we're in Chicago in May, we're in Dallas in June, We're in Charlotte. We're in the Washington, D.C./Baltimore area. Come November, I believe, we're in Southern California. So go to events.channelpronetwork.com and you can get all the dates and the locations, and you can register for any or all of those as well.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that anybody listening wouldn't want to talk about any of those things. But if so happened none of that perked your interest, which would be shocking, and you want to come and talk about like small engine repair, Rich is happy to talk about anything that you want to talk about. Literally, we will talk about anything. Just go meet him there at the back of the room, and he will converse with you on any topic you so desire. And to make that easier for you folks, I'm going to put a graphic up on the screen for you. It's going to have a QR code. Just go ahead and scan that QR code if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening, go to channelproforum.com/Newark. Use the promo code CPVIP. That'll get you in the door for free as our special guests. So you can come and see me and Rich in person, shake our hand, and fill your brain with all kinds of good knowledge and information that you need to make your business better and to make more money. Because that's what it's all about, folks. Make more money. Awesome. So we've already seen his bright smiley face pop on the screen once so far this particular show, and we're going to see a lot more of him. I'm super excited to see we have a returning guest host. Last time he was on, I think it was in June of 2020, if I remember correctly, and it was a blast of a show, if I also remember correctly. And that man is the CEO and founder of Simplex IT, an Ohio-based MSP specializing in managed IT and co-managed IT services. He's also a 3-time Amazon best-selling author, including his latest book, I Don't Want Your Job. Is co-managed IT services the right fit for you? Please welcome back to the show, Bob Coppedge. Welcome, Bob.
Yay. Sorry, I let my excitement and enthusiasm just get away.
It's always fun when you're on, because not only are you all of those amazing things that we just talked about, you are also an improv comic, if I remember correctly.
Yep. I actually am a graduate of Second City Conservatory, which, as I've always said, proves that they'll take my money.
Well, but you've already got me laughing this particular episode, and it's always fun when you're on, because it's going to be a fun show. And Bob, I like to laugh. I like to be a goofball, and it's a dangerous combination when you or I are on. I'm just gonna warn everybody up front.
Yeah, I can't argue with
that. So if you can, for those folks who may have missed that first episode where you were on, tell us a little bit more about you and Simplex IT.
So I'm actually started Simplex IT back in 2007. We started out as a pure MSP, so we didn't go through the break fix standpoint. My history prior to that was more on the CIO side as opposed to a technician, as well as did a lot of BI, DBA stuff and the like. And we actually started doing co-managed services almost right out of the gate, and have ever since. But we didn't realize what we were doing on many levels, come to think of it. And so here we are. We systematized it about 5 or 6 years ago, and actually started going out marketing the co-managed IT. And I've spoken about it to MSPs, and we've shared our model through both writing as well as Facebook groups, as well as MSP conferences and the like. And it's an ongoing thing, and it's a lot of fun. We talked to a lot of really great people in the MSP market, and a lot of the vendors who are getting on the bandwagon, if that's the appropriate term.
Yeah, it seems like the co-managed IT space has been kind of slow to grow. It seems like there's always maybe fear on the business side, because if they have an IT department, they don't want somebody kind of encroaching on their space, or the IT services side kind of wants the whole pie, not to work with anybody else. Is there like an ideal solution, or really does it depend on the customer and you?
There's an ideal solution. There's a framework that you need to put together. So one of the first things is the MSP needs to understand what is their best value proposition to the client that can involve internal IT in some form of partnership. And that can be you bring the virtual CIO level, that can be you bring the help desk level, that can be some combination thereof. It can be aimed at larger organizations. It can actually be aimed at smaller organizations, but you need to understand what that value proposition is. And you have to explain it to the internal IT people from their value perspective. Because if all you do is you basically go to the company and say, hey, we're going to make you guys fantastic, the internal IT sees it as an adversarial role. You're coming in to make me look bad. Whereas if you can go to the internal IT person and say, we're going to make you a rock star, we're going to make you so ridiculously productive, and we're going to partner with you to make sure that everything is going to work really well and terrific. And again, whether it scales up to this as a CIO type person or a one-person shop, then you've got a much better chance of making it work. But you have to know what it is you bring to the table and how it's going to benefit not only the company, but also the internal IT people.
And over the years, how long did it take you to kind of develop that model that works? And how do you pitch that specifically? I know you said talk about from their value proposition, but like, what's the right strategy to approach an IT department with that kind of proposal?
First of all, and it's weird because we've actually completely redesigned how we did it. Because we finally realized about a year ago, because we were doing the traditional, we have two different conversations. We have a conversation with the CEOs, we have a conversation with the internal IT. And we finally realized a little over a year ago, year and a half, that it really is about, we want to deliver fantastic, we want the client to have fantastic IT, and we'll partner with you to help make that happen. By really encompassing everything else you say into that simple statement, because at the end of the day, that's that person's job as well. That's that person's goal. But they may not have access to all the tools, all the pieces, all the people, all the skill sets that we do, and we don't have their internal knowledge. But if we work together, we'd be able to deliver that in a great way. So it's kind of like, have that as the cornerstone of your conversation. And the nice thing is, if you're talking to the CEO, it really doesn't matter whether they have internal IT or not. We want to make your organization that much more successful, secure, productive through the use of IT. Oh, and if you have internal IT, we can partner with them to make the same thing happen. So you really no longer have, and this is one of the things that we finally figured out, you really don't have to have fully separate, what we call pure MSP and co-managed MSP messages, if that makes sense.
Bob, one of the first times, if not maybe the first time I heard about co-managed IT was when you spoke about it in our magazine, sort of late in 2019. Yeah. And it was just starting, some of the vendors were starting to pay attention to this then. And then the first time I heard you speak about it was at an event we both attended right at the beginning of 2020, when it was still possible to attend events in person. And from that point forward, it really just kind of took off as an enormous topic of conversation anyway. So here we are about 2 years later. Do you have a sense for how widely adopted among MSPs that co-managed model has begun? Are people still kicking the tires, asking questions, trying to decide, or have you seen some momentum out there in terms of more companies doing what you've been doing for a while?
So that's a great question, which is really surprising. I kind of expected a lame one, but no, you did well. You did great. That's me trying to come up with an answer. So a couple of things. First of all, every time I've spoken over the last couple of years, whether it be virtually or prior to that face-to-face, I would always get about 2/3 of MSPs in the room say, yes, we have a co-managed client. But almost all of them stumbled into it. They didn't actually have a plan. They didn't have a consistent offering. They didn't have a way to go to market or anything. A client came up and said, hey, we need this, but we've got internal IT. What can you do? I think that has absolutely continued to grow. And you probably have a majority of MSPs. I mean, there's probably some kind of, a majority of MSPs with more than a dozen or so clients probably have some kind of co-managed agreement. It's interesting, I'm still seeing most of the MSPs website that talk about co-managed talk about it in yeah, we do that. And that's their message. They don't really talk about what is it, and whether that's them protecting their secret sauce, which I understand and I get that, or they're still in we don't have it well developed. And I just did a webinar about 3 weeks ago, and it's up on YouTube. We'll get you the link, where I define specifically what our models are, both for what we call co-managed and then a more zoomed in version, CoMITs. the different model, because we think we have a way to present it that actually talks about the value proposition right out of the gate. So it definitely is growing. I think it was on, and this is me making a little bit of a supposition here, I think it was going to grow a lot faster, but then between the pandemic and security, those became the two things that all MSPs had to deal with, whereas co-managed is something they could deal with, if that makes sense.
It does. It sounds like, I wonder if the whole COVID situation, the whole push to work from home did that drive maybe a little bit more adoption for IT departments and companies to reach out to MSPs to get help with that?
Absolutely, because you have this whole intrusion of an advanced skill set, or two, if we just say simply security and work from anywhere. You have these two totally different skill sets that most, especially in the SMB market, most organizations don't necessarily have or don't have in abundance. You talk about the workforce situation, it's getting worse, not better. In both of those cases, you can go to an MSP, and it gets back to the whole thing. Nobody can hire a quarter of a network administrator, except for magicians who cut people in half, but that doesn't usually work out well.
We were talking about legs earlier. I tend to hire by the leg.
Okay, and that works out well, but it gets Kentucky Fried Chicken people very, very annoyed. But I digress. But what ends up happening is that a company with a small to medium IT department, 1 to half a dozen people, they don't have full-time resources or full-time needs. So if they could go to an MSP who hopefully does have the full-time resources, but can dilute them or use them in a fractional way, then that works great. But I don't think the MSPs are communicating that ability effectively, if that makes sense. So the internal IT people who are going like, this is great, I'm going to go talk to MSPs. If they're willing to have that engagement, that's great. But it's one where we're still not effectively communicating and defining what the offering is and why it actually can work.
Very, very interesting, fascinating, and I'm sure that this is something that a lot of MSPs are thinking about, and as Rich said, probably kicking the tires around. And as you said, also maybe kind of got stuck with one, but now that's an opportunity. It sounds like that if you do have a co-managed client, whether you fell into it or wanted to, like it's an opportunity to think about putting a model behind it and actually going to market with a strategy to get more of those, not just having them fall in your lap.
Absolutely. And especially when you think about it from whether it be a testimonial standpoint or a case study standpoint, you really have that I don't want your job mentality that a lot of internal IT people are going to look at. And for you to basically say, look, I didn't take this person's job, any of them, they're still there and they're happy. Then the testimonial is so much more useful in the co-manage.
Is that also a good way to go up market too? Like, because if you're really focusing on companies that don't have IT departments, you probably are looking small. Does that give you the chance to get into larger organizations?
First of all, it absolutely does. Okay, the rough, because I do some coaching with MSPs on developing co-manage, and the rough estimate I say is you should, whatever your scale is for your peer MSP, double it. That's your scale for the co-manage. And once you get used to it, whether it be what I call the CoMITs or another version of co-manage is what I call silo MSP or whatever, you can scale even further. But either way, you should be able to increase the company you deliver to. Now, whether that company has, and you can think about it, and I try to simplify things because I'm not very bright, but you take a look at a traditional IT department you have the CIO, you have the level 3, level 2, level 1 in terms of skill set. Now, some don't have all of them. Some have people who fit multiple hats, whatever. But usually they're thin or top heavy or bottom heavy. So thin is where they have all the roles. They're just not effective enough. Top heavy is where they have like a CIO, IT director, and a level 3, but they don't have someone who's a level 1. So they end up paying level 3 rates for the person to do level 1 work. Or they're bottom heavy, they've got a level 1 or a level 2 but they don't have anybody on the top. And just by having that conversation, you can pretty much identify where a company is as far as their internal IT. And this scales very nicely. It scales to the one-person shop because you try to figure out where they're at, or you scale it up to a larger organization that actually has a CIO and an IT department, and they can talk about where they're top heavy or bottom heavy or the like. And then you can basically take all of the services that you provide and scale it and focus it on where their, I hate to say weaknesses are, but they are that. And by doing that, you now have a conversation that is talking specifically with the internal IT people about what they need to make their current resources better, as opposed to what they need to replace them.
Interesting. That's a fascinating discussion, and a model that people should definitely start to think about. It wouldn't be ChannelPro Weekly if I didn't ask, because I have to ask this, because tell me a little bit more about your background in comedy. So you said you graduated from Second City,
right?
What did you do after that? Did you stay in comedy for a while?
So what's that?
Did you stay in comedy for a while?
You mean I'm not now? No, I've done stand-up. So first of all, I never quit my day job. Okay. So this has always been a hobby or the like, but I actually helped found and run an improv group in Northeast Ohio. They're actually out of Cuyahoga Falls, called Point of No Return. And I was the creative director, whatever. And it was community theater, so no big deal. But I did that for about 15 years. And the company just last week, my wife and I attended their 20th anniversary show. They're still going strong and the like, and that was great. I've done stand-up a couple of times. I don't care for it, but I was asked back and offered a paid gig. It was like $30, but it was a paid gig. So I got that, and obviously my attempts at humor permeate everything I do. And the reason being is because it is, well, first of all, to be perfectly honest, I have Asperger's. Okay. So I'm on the spectrum and all that kind of fun stuff. And part of my thing that goes on between my brain is I am always analyzing conversations because I suck at them. And so I'm always trying to figure out, and that means that I'm always finding humorous things, whether I intended to or not, because this is the path that a conversation could go. And I've found myself having to control those blurt outs as much as anything else. But what it also does is comedy, I should say humor, because there's a difference between the two. Humor is such an effective way. It's an effective lubricant when we're talking about having conversations or discussions with people, whether you're doing so from a higher status or a lower status, or a higher knowledge base or lower knowledge base than the other people that you're talking to. And if you think about it, the most fun conversations you've ever had have been with friends where you just start laughing and you have these incredibly stupid, dumb conversations that are the most entertaining and fun thing. And years from now, you'll have a secret code about, yeah, you remember when we were talking about it? And professionally, the ability to do those types of conversations is a game changer, in my opinion. As long as you use it appropriately and you use it to engage and move conversations forward, and especially if you can involve the other people and have them be part of the joke, which is, after all, what improv is about. So if, for example, if I was the one who just constantly talked about the stupid leg thing, I would be this idiot who had this fascination about legs and aliens, but the three of us did it. And we fed on each other and we did it naturally, and it worked. It created an energy, it created a synchronization. So you just wanted me to say, yeah, it was fun, didn't you?
I was really curious about how far you took it going out of Second City, but yeah, you know what? You summed it up great. Because I do like a lot of humor as well. And I love it when the guests kind of riff with you and feed off of it. And Rich can attest, after doing 215 shows with me, sometimes you fail.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's quite okay. But it's fun stuff. And it's great you're on. So we've got a lot of news to get to. We got a couple stories we want to talk about. We got an interview coming up. Oh my gosh, Bob, it's going to be a great show. We're going to talk about Gradient MSP. We're going to talk about Igi Cyberlabs, sock soders in the news. We're going to talk about the Microsoft new commerce experience. Folks, strap in. We've got a lot more ahead, and it's going to be a lot of fun because Bob Coppedge is here with us, and we're going to get rolling. So, Rich, what's up with Gradient MSP?
So let's start here because I'm not 100% sure everybody listening or watching right now is totally familiar with Gradient MSP, because that's a company that's only really been around for 15, 18 months, something like that at this point. Most people in the audience are probably familiar with Passportal. That was a company originally founded by a former MSP named Colin Knox. Colin sold Passportal to SolarWinds. He stuck around with SolarWinds for a while and then eventually left and formed Gradient MSP. And they, and we can talk about this if you want, they have this sort of bigger master plan, a vision for what they want to do and the role that they kind of want to play in the MSP ecosystem. But right now, last year, they launched their first really significant product, and it was called Billable. And Billable basically is a billing reconciliation system. Every MSP listening now knows the nightmare of trying to figure out how much consumption-based cloud to charge their customers for every month, how many seats, how many gigabytes, whatever it is that this usage-based vendor is charging by every month. You got to sit down for all the different vendors that you deal with and figure out the right amount to charge your customers. And there have been a number of different tools and initiatives and so on designed to kind of help with this a little bit. Billable is one of these systems, and the idea is you import data from the vendors. The system helps you reconcile it, and then you upload it to your PSA system. Now already they have integrations with 8 PSA systems for the Billable tool. There are 2 more coming soon. They're going to be up to 10 in a while. But the sort of missing piece has been the vendor, the as a service vendor integrations, because up until now, for the most part, since Billable launch, what you had to do was go to those different vendor sites, build a CSV file with the data you need, download that, and then from that point it was sort of a drag and drop process to get it into Billable and do the reconciliation. But there was still that manual piece of it. If they can integrate with those vendors, then the whole thing becomes automated. The data just sort of comes, you do whatever manipulation you need to do with it, and the data just sort of goes off to the PSA system. And so what Gradient MSP did this week is introduce, it's both a platform and a partner program from their perspective, but they're calling it Synthesize, and it's essentially an integration program for those vendors. And it is designed to attract as many of those vendors as possible. Now, this is obviously, if they can get a critical mass of vendors doing business with them through Synthesize, that's a great thing for Gradient MSP, and it's a great thing for their MSP partners. What they've got to do at Gradient is make this a great thing for the vendors and make this worth doing for them. And so there are a few ways that they're doing that. First of all, participation is free. So there's not that barrier that the vendors are going to have to deal with. There's no revenue sharing agreement, which is apparently a pretty common thing when you integrate with a popular platform. Quite often that popular platform wants a little piece of the money you're making through that integration. There's none of that here. They've made the tool as easy for vendors to connect with as possible. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is if you are in particular, this is true for any vendor, but if you're a newer vendor in particular, and you want to integrate with those 8 or 10 PSAs, just as Gradient has, you're probably going to have to do that one by one yourself. And that's a pretty big investment of people and time and money. And so another piece of the value proposition from Gradient is, well, actually, if you integrate with Synthesize, you'll not only be integrating with Billable, but through us, you can integrate with those 10 PSAs as well. And so we're going to save you that time and money and labor and make integration simpler. And so I'm just looking at a list of some of the vendors that have already signed up, and this is a partial list. Auvik, Breach Secure Now, Connect Me Voice, Mail Protector, Threat Locker. There was a longer list on Monday of this week when this announcement was made, and I actually interviewed them previous week about this and asked, so how many vendors do you have and who are they and so on. And they were reluctant to tell me because they have a whole bunch of these agreements that are like right at the final stage. Somebody kind of needs to sign and submit the paperwork. So they've already got a nice little head start. That there are apparently a lot more vendors coming, probably within the next few weeks, and then we'll just kind of have to see over time how big that ecosystem of synthesized vendors becomes, because the bigger it gets, the more attractive Gradient MSP gets.
Yeah, that's going to be the kicker, because the larger distributors they've already done this. And the larger PSAs, it's a little easier to do it. There's more financial incentive, but to get all the smaller guys involved with this, that's where it's going to be fun. But I really thought the interesting part is how he's looking to make money.
Right. Yeah. So, and I kind of hinted at this before. So billable, billing reconciliation, giant headache. And so this is an operational process that Gradient really feels like they can kind of help streamline. They're not talking specifics, but they're kind of thinking there might be some other operational processes that they could tackle in a similar way. The longer term vision is the more MSPs that they get working with them and sharing aggregated anonymous data with them, the better picture that they get about how MSPs do business and what they charge and what they make and so on. And so, and you have to kind of emphasize the anonymous angle of this. They're not going to be sharing your business particulars with everybody else out there. But, their thesis is, and I'll bet a lot of MSPs would agree, that there are probably a ton of MSPs out there not really making as much as they could, which is to say not making as much as they're really worth because they don't quite know how to price their services. And wouldn't it be great if there was this big pool of data that you could go to from a company like Gradient, say, and find out, okay, for MSPs about my size, with about my customer base in this part of the country, what do they charge? How do I compare with that? Collecting that kind of business intelligence warehouse and sharing that data with MSPs is sort of down the road a ways still, how they kind of really look to make money.
Interesting. So it's like there's kind of two conversations. It's like, well, what do they have now? What's the idea? And then are they going to be able to really capitalize on it? But Bob, I want to ask you the one question: is this in your business a big headache figuring out what's billable every month and doing billing reconciliation?
It's one of those where it's, for the most part, it's a one-time headache per service, because essentially you have to have that decision where every time you add a service, whether it's I'm now going to resell widgets, cloudwidgets.com service. Okay, now I have to figure out how to get the numbers as far as what the consumption of that service is through to my PSA, which is where I'm handling the billing from. But once I've got that done, now whether it's we do an integration through APIs or whatever, once that's done, then it's either a process that I have an office person do if it's exporting CSVs and importing or whatever, or it's something we have to set up one and done. I think initially it's going to be more interesting to the vendors. So a vendor who wants to resell cloudwidgets.com can say, hey, and if you use this free service, we're automatically going to integrate the billing with your PSA, whatever you're using. So that will encourage the vendors to basically be marketing the service to the MSPs. At least if I was in this boat, that's the way I would approach it for now.
Okay, interesting. Well, I'm sure we'll keep an eye on what they're doing and how this evolves and how many partners they bring on board, and talk about the value prop to MSPs as it changes. So we'll keep an eye on that. Next story, Rich, is about Igi Cyberlabs. They've integrated something with something, and MSPs might want to know about it.
I think so. And this might be the sleeper story of the week, actually. Igi Cyberlabs, it's like a unit of this bigger company, IGI. They sort of spun that off in 2021, specifically so that it could develop and sell a product that's been out there for a while called Nodeware. And Nodeware was originally developed for use by IGI. They started finding that partners were interested in using it too. And it wasn't until last year that they really decided to get serious in a big way about the channel. And Nodeware is a vulnerability management system. One of the things that's interesting about it is that it connects automatically to anything it finds on the network. It monitors for vulnerabilities on a continuous basis, so you don't necessarily have to schedule and execute scans. It's pretty good at finding IoT stuff in addition to PCs and servers. So there are a number of different things that make Nodeware kind of an interesting product. What they announced this week is an alliance agreement and an integration with SockSolder. And so SockSolder is like they have a number of services actually, but they do managed detection and response. They have a security operations center. They do endpoint protection. They do cloud security monitoring. But essentially, it's one of these organizations with a lot of in-depth in-house security expertise that you can kind of bring in for outsourced assistance. Via this integration, Nodeware, it's now continuously looking for vulnerabilities, and when it spots one, instead of or in addition to just alerting the MSP, it alerts SockSolder. And so now SockSolder can kind of analyze, diagnose the seriousness of this vulnerability and either fix it for the partner or tell the partner how to fix it. But it's creating a connection between a continuously operational vulnerability management system and a professionally staffed security operations center. This might be happening elsewhere out there, and I just don't know about it. But this is the first time that something like that has come onto my radar, at least. And it's a really interesting combination of services, because really, if you think about it, if there's going to be a vulnerability on the network, I want to know about it and do something about it as quickly as possible. I don't want to have to wait for that next weekly, bi-weekly, monthly scan, to find out about it. And I don't want to have to kind of wrap my brain around what I would love it, if my outsourced SOC is either dealing with it or helping me deal with it. So it's an interesting service.
Usually when MSP is here, someone else can deal with it. Usually that is a good thing. Is that right, Bob?
It's kind of interesting. This is like the earlier conversation we had talking about CoMITs, co-manage, where an internal IT group don't have enough work for a full-time security, full-time network administrator. The same thing is true from an MSP. MSPs don't have the ability to have their own SOC. And so I think this is a great opportunity or a great situation where I think both these parties basically said, we've got this great tool, but MSPs don't have the resources necessary to properly manage this tool on a 24/7 basis. And especially if the tool really works on IoT devices, because a lot of current security situations are not that effective on the IoT side. But when you take a look at, for example, Target got hacked because of their HVAC. And the largest Las Vegas hack happened because of aquariums. So IoT vulnerabilities is a huge thing. But fine, so we've got this service, but MSPs don't have enough resources to give it the attention it deserves. And now you've got this the SOC option. And with this option, you can basically scale it so that a smaller MSP can actually say, yeah, we're going to monitor, but we've also got somebody else who's going to be able to do something. There are services that will do this, but they're usually the service and the SOC is integrated. It's the same thing, and this is the first I've heard of two separate organizations, one with product, one with management of the product, partnering together. And I agree with you when you say this might be the sleeper. I'm interested in this one.
Yeah, kind of neat. I was also wondering, what is a sock soat? Because they call their company SockSolder. What's a sock soat? Do you know?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you though.
Well, because I couldn't find it online. So if you know, you might be the only one that knows.
Which is a happy place for my mind. And I'm absolutely fine living in this happy place.
He's holding the definition of SockSoat ransom, folks. He wants $10 million to tell us all. No, it's cool. I agree. This is a sleeper story. This is pretty neat and a pretty good thing for MSPs. Did they talk about is there pricing involved with this? I have to assume that if you use Nodeware, you're paying for that, and then if you are using SockSoder's Security Operations Center, you're paying for that. So is this just a bridge now between the two, or does this have its own kind of fee structure?
So I don't know the answer to that categorically, but I believe it is, they now have this capability to collaborate with these two companies in that way. And so you would need to be a customer, a partner of both those companies. I am not aware of them having sort of discounted pricing for people who buy both services, but they might.
Okay. I can't imagine they don't. I mean, just from an economic standpoint or the like, because IGI is probably looking at this and going, boy, we've got a lot of clients who are buying our product, but they don't know how to manage it appropriately. And SockSoder is essentially saying, hey, we've got this SOC service, but boy, wouldn't it be great if they just use this one platform, because it would make it so much easier in terms of staffing and managing. And on our standpoint, let's even if you raise the price and then offer it the original discount or whatever, I gotta believe there's going to be an economy of including both services.
Yeah, I would think so too. I would think so too. And it's amazing, as you said, how much where your vulnerabilities are on the network these days. Like, who knew that fish were such a threat? You know what I mean?
It depends on the fish, but yeah, some fish are jerks.
They are. We were talking about the legless earlier. We were not talking about the finless. The fish don't listen to this show. They're not welcome here. Those evil, evil fishes. I tell you, they are delicious, though. I will say that. So, Rich, I think that wraps up the news. I guess also the big story: fish are delicious, folks. Go ahead and dive in. But we've got some other stories that we want to talk about, and one of those, and this is everybody in the channel is talking about this right now, because it really does affect everybody, because who is not a Microsoft partner in the IT channel, except for that one guy. There's that one guy who's like, you know what, I'm gonna be the holdout, and I'm not gonna be
Larry.
Microsoft. Yeah, Larry. Larry.
He's a jerk.
He is a jerk, and he's always got to go against the flow.
Oh man, don't get me started.
So Larry, this story's not for you, but you might want to listen to the next one, but not this one. We're talking about the Microsoft new commerce experience. It's coming, and it's hitting. And it's hitting. I mean, it's already kind of started the rollout, but it's going to be the reality for everyone very soon. Rich, tell us about this story.
Well, you know what? Honestly, so this was inspired by a story from the most recent issue of ChannelPro about new commerce experience and some of what partners are dealing with and how they're beginning to navigate it, because we're still in the early phases of this. We talked about this just a few episodes ago on the podcast with Dave Cyber. I almost don't really want to dive into that story. I just want to kind of use it as an excuse. So we spoke with Dave. Dave is like a very sophisticated, mature MSP. He is plugged in deep with Microsoft. He really, really understands the nuances of their licensing. And so he's not maybe a representative of the audience out there. I just wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to talk to Bob and just see how are you coping with this?
The unsophisticated.
Yeah, exactly.
MSP.
Yeah. I've got the perfect guy on the show here to.
Larry put you up to that, didn't he?
Yeah.
We shouldn't have insulted him.
So I've said this many times, and I've said it to Microsoft's face. Microsoft is my favorite professionally dysfunctional relationship. There's no question whatsoever that our clients, and therefore we, are critically linked to their services, however you want to define it, good, bad, or indifferent. And it's one of those where I think the new commerce experience is an example. So if you think about Microsoft services, especially the 365 and the Azure and the like, everything they're doing is they're trying to make it as easy as possible and as frictionless as possible for the end client to receive their goods and services with minimal input or expertise in the middle. And that absolutely makes perfect sense and the like. And what they're doing is essentially they're removing some of the incentives that we as MSPs had for reselling their services, not for supporting them, but for reselling them, especially the penalty-less month-to-month being at the same price as their annual offering. And I don't think anybody should be surprised at this, because quite honestly, I don't think Microsoft has really been MSP, I don't want to say friendly, because that makes them out to be the bad guys, and I'm not implying that. But they really haven't done a lot incentivizing MSPs, with the exception of some sales for reselling, really since Small Business Server went away. And I think this is basically, and I hate to say next shot across the bow, but I think this is just that next step. And I love in your article, I love the quote which Microsoft says will result in a more intuitive and streamlined purchase experience for partners, making it easier to meet the diverse needs of customers and reducing the complexity of the overall sales process between partners and their customers, which is so intuitive and streamlined a statement. And the one thing about Microsoft is licensing is hard. Figuring out what the best product for an organization to bring value to that organization is hard. And if it's hard for MSPs, it is doubly hard for your clients. That should be your focus. Microsoft is going to do what Microsoft wants to do. And if you have to worry about the 12 to 20% profit you make on reselling Microsoft 365, you're in the wrong business. You have to sell the value that you bring that helps your clients improve their bottom line by using all of the Buffalo, all of Microsoft 365, all of Azure. That, in my opinion, is where you should focus right now, for what that's worth.
Have you sort of thought your way through, one of the things that changes with NCEE is that there are strong kind of financial incentives in place to push end users towards annual or 3-year contracts in terms of the amount of margin you can make, but you are like financially on the hook for that 1 year, say, contract. If the customer walks away after 8 months, you've got to cover for them, those remaining 4 months and pay that's just one example of the wacky things that folks out there have to kind of think about and decide what they're going to do about. Have you kind of come up with a plan at this point, or are you still kind of, sifting through it?
It's real simple. You want to stay with us, we're going to charge you an additional fee for the month to month. That's it. If you want to, but we'll say if you prefer to purchase an annual subscription paid annually, or a 3-year subscription paid, here's a link. Let's talk about it. So I will not put myself at risk, because, like you said, you're exactly right. I can have them pay month to month, but I'm on the hook for all 12 months. No, we don't do that. If the client wants to purchase the stuff directly through Microsoft, and this is the part we're still having discussion internally, we may actually say that's absolutely fine, but we're going to raise the management costs because we were making some money out of it. One of the things we do is we have conversations with our clients about how we make money. We make money by providing the value and charging a reasonable amount. We're here to make a profit. And if we're losing the profit over here, we're going to gain the profit over here, but we're still giving you the value. And the conversations we've had with our clients so far, and we've talked with about 15 or 20 of them, has been, okay, fine. Because we make clear we're not doing anything except passing the increase of cost over to the client, and making sure they understand they don't need to have, the Defenders now being included with a lot of the SKUs that it wasn't before. What do they call the phone app option, the phone add-on is also being included now. So we've actually found some of our clients that we're actually going to save them money because they're going to be able to cancel some of their stuff. So just be honest.
And I would think that's, go ahead.
I was going to say, so it doesn't say your company name isn't Simplex IT Charities Inc. is what you're saying?
No, my wife sometimes thinks it is, but
Go ahead, Rich.
Well, I was just going to say, I would think that is the conversation you just described probably isn't all that hard a conversation to have with the customer, because it's like, I know Bob. I know Bob wouldn't just, arbitrarily raise costs on me because he could. And I also know Microsoft, like these big technology. So, I mean, if you're sitting down with them and saying, look, they've changed the rules at Microsoft, here's what it means for you. And here's what, you're going to end up paying a little bit more. This is not something that we chose but this is how it is. And here are the implications for you. I would think customers would sort of accept and understand that, in some ways kind of expect this is the kind of thing that happens now and again.
And the two add-ons, or the three add-ons I would give to that, is number one, Microsoft has not increased their price for near a decade. So anybody who's going to look at the price increase and say, oh my goodness, this is highway robbery, I'm sorry, I live on Earth. I live here anyway. And this is, again, even on I'll defend Microsoft's right and legitimacy to increase the price, no problem. The second is, I will share links of Microsoft's announcement that they're doing just this. That includes the price increases. So you're going to see that I'm just following Microsoft's lead to this. And I can also, in most cases, show or have conversations, or I've had conversations with clients. And this is one of those things where, again, me giving free advice to other MSPs who didn't ask for it. If you have to scramble and beg and plead for every dollar that you get from your clients, you have the wrong clients, or you're having the wrong conversations with those clients. Your value should be well defined, but not as in, I monitor your networks, but what is the end result of your services, and how are they better able to work with their clients and better able to sleep at night because of what you do? Quit talking about yourself. Talk about them.
Oh, for sure. And it's not like the customer can go to somebody else and not get the price increase. Like, this affects everybody.
I never underestimate. There are some MSPs who will probably offer the annual price on a monthly fee and take the risk of early cancellation. So wow. Never underestimate. There are some people, and some of them, sadly, they may be in that cash flow situation where they can't afford to do that. So if you want to go with the people who are the cheapest on the planet, I can't argue with you, and best of luck and all of that.
Interesting. And you know what? One thing you said that I think is important to point out too is when you said Microsoft hasn't really raised the prices in like a decade. Even at the new prices, especially if you just look at the Microsoft 365 side of the house, it offers a tremendous amount of value. I mean, and they've added tons of value to it over the last 10 years.
And I will add one more, and I will give you significantly good odds that most, and I'm speaking again to the MSPs, most of your clients don't use a tenth of it. And part of that is your responsibility to help educate them on how to get better bang for their buck out of using what they already have.
Very true. Very good point. Excellent stuff. And we can probably talk about that for hours on end. We got one more story we want to talk about, then we got a great interview we got to get to. And Rich, this one is kind of an interesting one. I don't know if I've seen an article like this on ChannelPro before, but maybe we have at one point. It's called Power Up Your Website. And does that take double A's, triple A's? What kind of power are we adding?
You want to plug this right into the main line out there. Forget about the batteries. You're looking for high voltage, basically, on that website. You know what? I don't know. We probably have talked about website design and optimization in the past, but if we have, it's been a while, and we clearly haven't done enough of it. I sort of put this on the editorial calendar thinking we ought to revisit this topic. And then when the article, our freelancer sent in the article, there was some evidence right at the beginning of it that, yeah, this is probably something we should be talking about, because the story quotes an organization called TSL Marketing that went out and did some research. They surveyed MSPs and cloud solution providers and VARs and asked them, how does your website measure up against those of your competitors? And only 7% said that their website was worse than that of their competitors, which tells you there are a lot of people overestimating the quality of their website right now, and which means there are a lot of opportunities to get better at that. and just tons of great insights and really kind of specific ideas about what to do around that in this article. I was really, really happy with the way this article came together. And you know what, this is right at the beginning of the article. I'll read it. It was so much fun for me to see this first draft. This is right how the article starts, and it goes right to what you were talking about, Bob, a minute ago. You know, don't make it about you, make it about them. The article asks, is founded in 1982 by Chuck and his 3 sons one of the first things visitors to your website learn? If so, Heather Margolis has news for you. Nobody cares. Now she is the vice president of marketing at 360 Insights, and really, really smart about not just websites, but all aspects of marketing as an MSP. And she said, look, your website needs to say in 30 seconds or less what it is that you do and why the customer should care. What, you need to understand what they want. And then in 30 seconds or less, help them see as soon as they visit the website how you're going to do that for them. And so lots of advice. Obviously these days you have to think, and a lot of people don't yet, but you have to think in terms of a mobile friendly website, a website that people are maybe going to encounter for the first time on their phone. SEO, we all kind of know that that's important, but how do you build that into a website? What role can e-commerce play potentially on your website? And so again, lots of great advice on all those areas. SEO, I'm just looking through the article here. Interestingly enough, on SEO and paid advertising, because that's another thing, another form of electronic marketing. The experts that we consulted in this story said you very well might want to work with a pro in this area. That you can kind of play around with SEO and trial and error, see if you get better at that, but that might be an area where it actually kind of makes some sense to invest a little money and get really good at it. Same with the paid advertising. And then, what can you do? We were joking about chatbots before, but that is sort of a recommended step, that if you want people to be able to engage with you via the website immediately, and you don't want them to have to call and nobody answers the phone or whatever, why not hook a chatbot service up to the website and then have that service hand the caller over to a human being if somebody really has questions and get engaged. So a lot of interesting stuff in the story. Obviously, we've got a link to it from the show notes.
Yeah, another great thing to do, why don't you go ahead and throw a 5-star survey up on your website 4 seconds after I land on the page so I can rate your site after seeing it for 4 seconds. That's a really good thing to do too. God, that drives me nuts. Bob, do you know Chucker's 3 sons?
Actually, I was just thinking we really should have gone, instead of with Larry, we should have gone with Chuck, because that would have been a great segue here for us to go, Chuck. So,
yeah,
so instead we'll say Larry's or Chuck's oldest son is Larry.
they're all related.
Yeah.
They sure are. Cool.
Incestuous MSP. So, but I do have something to say, and yes. I can actually add some numbers to this thing. We had a situation, so we were doing traditional marketing. MSPs, 9 out of 10 of you guys, including myself historically, you talk about yourself way too much. You're not that interesting, you're not that important, and you don't drive. It's the result of your services that are important, not your services. And we were in a position just about a year ago where we went through 2020, and thankfully we had a decent year. We grew like 8%, 9%. Thankfully, we've always grown every year. But our closing percentage was somewhere around 25, 30%. And we weren't happy with that as far as our proposals. So we invested, and we actually started investing about 6 months earlier, big time, website, materials, everything. And we bought into the Story brand. And the Story brand concept is a marketing and sales concept that really talks about the client as the hero of the story. And the guy who started this is a huge movie fan. He's basically, nobody wants to be rescued by Luke Skywalker. They want to be Luke Skywalker. And so we completely redid everything. And in 2021, we grew 19% and our closing percentage was 60. So we went from 20 something to 60% closing rate because we talked about them. We talked about the clients. We talked about their journey, their story, their needs, their services. And we did so both from a managed, a pure MSP standpoint, and we do so from a co-managed MSP. And it was all about driving that value to them, their value of how they use IT. We also started about 6 months or about a year earlier. We post a video every day, every business day. We post a video on LinkedIn. Today is actually it's Thursday. We talk every Thursday about MSP value, or excuse me, how to MSP proof your job to internal IT people. Every Tuesday, we do a video about IT driving value to CEOs. And I've just hired 2 new marketing people. One's content development, the other one's videographer. We are going to be creating a ton of value and a ton of videos and concepts, and they're all going to be based on another concept that I love, which is They Ask You Answer, which is all about content delivery, and it is none of it, or almost none of it, is going to be how wonderful we are.
Very cool. Very cool. It looks like you've proven that there's a lot to this approach, and to think about things like the website as a way to grow. And perhaps yours isn't as good as you think it is. So we should definitely turn people on to that. There's actually a lot in this article, folks. And if you haven't picked up on it, all of the articles that we've talked about, news stories we've talked about, they're all at channelpronetwork.com. If you open your phone and you look at the description for the show, you should see the links in there. If not, you can go to channelpronetwork.com, find the show sheet for 215. All the links are there. And we're just kind of scratching the surface, giving our thoughts on these stories and news articles. But all the detail, all the nitty gritty is right there for you. If you're watching on YouTube, hello, hit the like button, hit the bell, subscribe first, then you have to hit there's some kind of order like that. But do that, leave a comment. That goes a long way. If you open the description area on YouTube, all of these links are there for you to follow along with as well as we go through it. So awesome stuff. Unfortunately, we can't talk about this anymore because we're starting to run a little bit long, and we got an awesome guest waiting in the wings to have a fantastic discussion. Mr. Frank Battagliano is going to be joining us to talk about distribution and trends. You're not going to want to miss it. Stick around. We will be right back. And we are back with part 2 of this episode of ChannelPro Weekly. Joining us here on the other side is executive editor Rich Freeman, as well as Bob Coppedge, the CEO and founder of Simplex IT. He's still with us as well. You know, the distribution industry has endured and flourished in the IT channel, adapting from box movers to vital partners to MSPs and their ability to deliver physical and digital solutions. Now, here to discuss current and future trends in distribution is Frank Battagliano, the CEO of Global Technology Distribution Council. Welcome, Frank.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. It's great to have you here with us. If you can, tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about the GTDC, as it would be short for.
Yeah, so I'll start with a little bit about me. So I've been in the industry for quite a long time, spent a number of years on the vendor side with IBM, Juniper Networks, and Dell, mostly on the channel side. You know, a variety of different roles, but mostly on the channel side. Spent a couple of years running a managed service provider and a pretty big solution provider out in the Texas area, and then took the GTDC role. It'll be 3 years now, coming up in May, and so lots of different experiences in the space. You know, and I would argue everything probably, you know, except working in distribution, but I spent time being a partner with distribution, which is what I view most of the vendors as, and certainly a customer of distribution for, you know, a couple of 3 years. So kind of prepared me pretty well for this role. So GTDC, let me kind of tell you a little bit about GTDC. It actually got started, I guess it was formed in 1998. And essentially we're a nonprofit trade association, if you will. And our role is to educate the marketplace on not only the role of distribution, but obviously the value that, you know, distribution provides. And we spend a lot of time talking to sort of all of the dimensions of the supply chain. So I spend a lot of time talking to the vendor community. As you guys know, as I mentioned, I came out of that space. So, vendors, have had traditionally long-standing relationships with the distributors. But I spent a lot of time with the vendors, talking to them about what's going on, what's happening in the marketplace, what the distributors are doing, what should they be doing, what changes should they be making, those types of things. Also have a lot of discussions with consultants and analysts, in the space, and essentially really work at educating the marketplace on, on what's happening in space. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you on. We alluded to kind of in the introduction, and you said you've kind of been in the industry a long time, and you've seen how distribution has kind of you've seen firsthand how the distribution distributors out there have been able to kind of adapt and change their ways over the years. Talk a little bit about how distribution has been able to keep up with the way the channel has gone.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, if you go back to the beginning, right, when 30, 40 years ago, which I hate to admit, I was probably there, distribution was a bank and a warehouse, right? I mean, that what was the function, but it was really important. The role that they played was really critical at the time, because there had to be a way to get product, from the vendor's warehouse, if you will, onto the end user's desk, and distribution was vital in making that happen. And then it kind of evolved. It evolved into more than just doing warehousing and financing. It evolved into essentially providing a whole different level of services for the solution providers. So the solution providers in this space obviously know very well what distribution does. They've been their customers forever. And so, whether it's demand generation, whether it's pre and post sale, technical support, all of those things kind of evolved through the 80s, 90s, 2000 period, and then we sort of got to, the era that we're in now, the digital transformation, the cloud era, and things are changing, dramatically in terms of how people procure product, how people support product. But what isn't changing is the fact that the solution providers still rely on these long-standing relationships that they've had with distributors for a long time. I mean, I'll give you a great example. If you look back a couple of years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the few areas that didn't experience hugely, disruptive supply chains was in the IT space. And a major reason for that was the work that distribution did and the relationships they had, and frankly, some of the buffer inventory that was in place to enable the flow of, goods in addition to the services that they then provided. Now, obviously, it's a little different environment now. We've got some supply chain disruptions for a variety of different reasons, but distribution has been providing, or the distributors have been providing, a fundamental service for a long time that has evolved over the years and will continue to evolve as they go forward. And we're seeing that, on a regular basis.
Frank, one reason I'm really excited to have you here is you've got a big picture view on distribution as an industry, obviously. And so I'm sort of curious to get your take on a number of different things. As I'm sure you are aware, about 10 days ago, before we are recording this episode, IDC published some research. And I'll do a really close sort of paraphrase of something that they said in the press release announcing that study. Total IT product revenue reported by GTDC members, which represents nearly 90% of total products sold through the channel in North America, reached a new peak of more than $70 billion in 2021. Revenue growth for Tier 1 distributors was up 7.2% year over year in 2021. That's up from 2% in 2020 and 5% in 2019. That's interesting. And I'm curious to get your take on why that, I mean, so it was an enormous jump last year over 2020 for reasons maybe we could kind of guess, but it's even way up from 2019 before the pandemic. So how much of this is just a reflection of demand for technology generally? How much of it is inflation, maybe? And how much of it is a reflection of some of the trends in distribution that you were just talking about?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, first of all, as you guys know, because you spend a lot of time in this space like I do, the space is healthy. The market's healthy. What's happening in the marketplace and the demand that's out there is really significant. Now, in some cases, the demand might be a little bit overstated at times, because when you get into a supply chain situation, everybody has a view of what demand really is. And over time, as you begin to satisfy it, it might not be as significant as you think it is. So when you hear a lot of folks talking about, huge backlogs and huge demand, there occasionally is some shadow demand there, which once you start filling it, the backlog kind of falls out a little bit, because most of the time what happens in this space is the solution providers will have orders in with everybody and whoever can get it to them first, right? But with that said, obviously over the last couple of years, we've seen a tremendous I guess I wouldn't call it an increase, because I think it's always been there, but a tremendous need for, continued technology for obvious areas, whether it was the work from home, phenomenon that was driving a lot of it, whether it was the what we're seeing with the migration to cloud, et cetera. But that hasn't dissipated. I mean, it has remained really significant, and I think it's being driven, by what we're seeing in on the low end, which was a lot of the work from home stuff and a lot of the stuff to get people ready and capable to do what needed to be done. But what's also starting to happen is the data center piece is starting to come back now. And we're starting to see that, and that's been relatively, maybe not flat, but certainly hasn't grown as significantly over the last couple of years for obvious reasons, right? And so what we're starting to see is in the fourth quarter, that started to come back a little bit as people started thinking about heading back into the office, as they started looking at the demands that were the requirements within the office for technology, whether it's compute, whether it's storage, whether it's networking, that those trends are beginning to accelerate. And so I really think that we're not going to see the end of this for a while. I mean, I don't think it's being driven. Perhaps it's being driven a little bit by inflation, but prices aren't significantly up in that space. So it's not like the revenue was expanded through that. Demand is actually very robust, and it's a good time to be in the space. And the folks that are in it, and I'm sure you guys spend a lot of time talking to, solution providers and vendors, will all tell you that it's a pretty robust time out there.
You know what? It's a pretty good time to be a distributor, too. I mean, if you look back at 2021, Ingram Micro gets purchased for big money not that long ago. You have Tech Data and Synex merging in a blockbuster transaction. Here's some data from GTDC's latest annual report, looking beyond the curve, and we'll include a link to this in the show notes for people who want to check it out, which I encourage you to do. There was a really interesting graph in there, Frank, comparing the stock performance of distribution to the 5 leading stock exchanges globally in aggregate. And I don't know why the people who produce this research, it's a company called Context, I don't know why they chose these start and end dates, but if you look September 2019 to December 2021, those 5 major global stock exchanges are up 33%. And in that same time period, the stock performance, the market cap of distribution is up 226%. So it's a great time to be in distribution. why is, and part of why I asked this is, I remember 5 years ago, there were people who thought distribution was doomed because everything is going to the cloud. And like you said, distribution was a bank and a warehouse. Who needs the warehouse anymore at that point? What do you think explains the incredible amount of money that's getting poured into distribution and the stock market success, business success distributors are having?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned some of it. First of all, you got to start with looking at, and that report, by the way, Context is a partner of ours that that does the GTDC data reporting for Europe. So we work closely with Context. They're very plugged into the European market and have relationships with, many distributors in Europe. But, if you look at what's transpired over the last couple of years, and, you kind of mentioned it, we've had, at one point, we had more public companies, distributor companies than we have today. Ingram went private, starting with the HNA transaction a couple of years ago, and now recently got purchased and closed by, Platinum. And that was a significant transaction. The whole Tech Data Synex scenario was really interesting because Tech Data did the same thing, went private. Apollo, I think it was, also bid by Berkshire, bid on it, and Warren Buffett's company, and then subsequently effectively got bought by a public company, which was Synex, and now merged, and it's now a $60 billion entity, right? TD Synex. You've had other folks have also events, either purchase or some kind of equity event. And essentially what's happening is people are realizing the value, because look at the private equity guys, and even to certainly a large extent, the public markets, they're not making investments in companies that they don't think are growing, and they don't think there's pent up value. And in many cases, that value, their view is it's an undervalued situation that over the next 3 to 5 years will grow significantly. And that's what I think what we're seeing in distribution. What we're seeing is the marketplace realizes that with all the changes that we see, with the complexity in the marketplace, and I don't have to tell you guys or tell your audience how complex it is out there when you start looking at everything we're seeing with cloud, with security requirements, proliferation of different offerings, different product sets. Somebody's got to be there to sort of manage and orchestrate all of that. And the role that distribution is now taking, and you mentioned the bank and the warehouse piece. Well, the bank is still there. The bank piece is still significant. Warehouse piece will always have some significance because there's always going to be some level of hardware, right? But over time, that's becoming less and less, particularly with the advent of subscription models and consumption models, et cetera, which are significant. But there's a huge amount of value that I don't really think has really come to the forefront yet. In other words, I think there's a ton more opportunity for the role that they play and the services that they provide in the marketplace. And I think that's being recognized. And I think that's why the valuations are moving up. I think that's why the stock prices have gone up. Now, you could argue that, the whole technology space in general over the last 2 to 3 years has seen a, tremendous increase. So, they're riding the wave of that a little bit. But to me, the most significant, or at least as important, is the private equity piece. When the private equity guys, are making major bets, big bets in, 30, 40, 50 billion dollar companies, when they're making those bets, you can be pretty sure that they've spent a lot of time on due diligence, viewing what the opportunity is and why they play such an important role. And I think their role is integral, right? And I don't think it's going away. And I think over time, there's lots of different dimensions to it. the whole hyperscaler piece and what their role is and how distribution works with them and through them. I think that's all important. But what's most significant is the vendors have relied on those relationships with distribution for 40 years. And more importantly, their customers, solution providers, have relied on those relationships. And the thing you got to remember is we're in a multi-cloud, hybrid solutions kind of a world that nobody else is capable of putting it all together and providing the level of support required than the folks that are, in distribution that have been doing it at scale for, a long time. And I think, Rich, that's what you're seeing. And I think that's what's playing out here in the space.
So the TD Synnex deal has come up a couple of times here already. I mean, do you have any sense for whether or not there is more consolidation to come in distribution?
Yeah, if you look at, you almost have to do it by, geography, right? You got to do it by location. So, if you look at North America has seen its fair share of consolidation over the last couple of years. And so what you've got is two very, very big players in, in North America and, Ingram and TD Synnex. And then you have, D&H and Arrow, which are, good sized players. And then after that, you got a bunch of niche, players, all very good at what they do, but tend to be smaller. They tend to be more focused on either emerging technology or specific types of technology, whether it's storage or security or whatever. And I think there's always the opportunity for folks like that to, end up, becoming part of a bigger entity. So I think that's certainly out there, and there's potential for that. The other piece, though, that's really significant is if you look at it on a global basis, in Europe on a country by country basis, I mean, there's as many distributors, in France or in Germany as there is in all of the United States, right? And then you multiply that by, X number to take into account all of the countries, in Europe, and you've got, tremendous amount of, not huge players, players that might be in the, $2 to $5 billion, US range. And I think there will continue to be consolidation there for sure. Obviously I don't, and nor could I talk to any if I knew of any specifically, but I would tell you that I'm pretty confident that over time there'll be continued consolidation, because what we are starting to find is scale matters in this space. And the reason scale matters is folks have got to make, in the distribution space, have got to make really significant investments to transform their business into, in order to continue to provide all the support and services that people need. Well, you probably saw when the TD Synnex announcement was made, Rich Hume, the CEO, spent a lot of time talking about the fact that what has happened is this enables them to take a pool of dollars that were Synnex dollars, TD dollars, so gross dollars of big numbers, right? Whatever percentage you want to use of $60 billion, right? Big numbers. And now allocate those to the areas that they're making investments in from an innovation standpoint. And they're the ones that you would think. It's cloud, it's security, remains, really critical. AI is, really important, but all the digital transformation items, they're making major investments in, and they're making investments in transforming their business to be able to support the requirements that are coming out of the vendor community, and certainly that their customers have. And it's the same story with Ingram. When you look at the announcement that was made when, Platinum purchased it, they talked about, a consolidated pool of dollars that can be invested. So scale matters. So I think over time, there will be continued consolidation for that reason.
Every time I talk to a hardware maker these days, or a distributor for that matter, I always ask, the inevitable supply chain question. It's like, I got to ask. The answer is always, I don't have a crystal ball, et cetera. And I don't blame anyone for saying that. But given all the conversations that you have out there with companies that have a really good kind of view on things right now, do you have any sense for how much longer we're going to be talking about supply chain as an issue in IT?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, we've been talking about it for a long time. I mean, I can tell you stories from, 30 years ago when we were talking about it, and I was running around worried about allocating product and who was going to get it and why were they going to get it. And, nobody was happy with you, right? And whether it was, the warehouse had a fire in it, or the trucks, got broken down, and any number of issues, we've had it for a long time. So on a macro level, we'll always deal with those types of things. I think, from what I'm seeing and hearing, I think we'll continue to struggle through 2022. I think, as the fourth quarter kind of rolls out a little bit, I think you may see it dissipate a bit and it'll sort of get a little bit better. But the demands are so incredible, and what we experienced was probably a perfect storm, right? Where, first of all, the whole just-in-time supply chain, sort of process is one that I think got overdone, and I think did not anticipate the kinds of issues that we are starting to see. Certainly nobody could have anticipated a global pandemic, right? But if you look at it, you say, well, how could this have happened? Well, so we're very tight in terms of managing supply. Everybody was priding themselves on, reducing the days of inventory and managing it really tightly. So then what happens? Well, then we have a global pandemic. And people are not quite sure what's going to happen. But the first thing that people thought at the time was, we better cut production a little bit, because this is going to definitely have an impact on what's happening, right? There's no way this won't impact our business. So they cut production. So then what happens? The reverse of what we thought was going to happen. Demand accelerated versus, decreased. So now you had a scenario where just-in-time inventories were in place. We cut demand, or the suppliers cut some demand, cut some production. Demand accelerated, and all of a sudden we're caught, and you can't catch up overnight with that, particularly in the chip space, right? You just can't catch up overnight and that quickly. So as a result, and of course, there are requirements for chips everywhere. I mean, you can't get automobiles, you can't, it's just nuts right now. So I don't think, from what I'm seeing and hearing, that, you'll see it dissipate in a huge way. I think we'll continue to see it through 2022. But there are cracks. It's starting to, occasionally you'll get a sense that we're making some progress, but I think it'll continue, Rich, through 2022 is my take. And then, it'll become a little bit more business as usual until we deal with the next, situation, which is one of the reasons why I keep going back to the role distribution plays and how important they are, because they are a buffer, they are a backbone, and they are sort of the orchestrator of being able to get supply from somebody's warehouse to an end user. And they've done a pretty good job of that, with the exception of when there's nothing to get, then it becomes hard.
Frank, let me ask a quick question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I'm just going to jump in and piggyback on what Frank was saying about the just-in-time. And I'm going to say just-in-time failure, and that's an exaggeration to a certain degree. But you just about name every vulnerability that the just-in-time concept, which really started in the 80s over in Japan for automotive manufacturing, every vulnerability, whether every party throughout the distribution channel was incentivized to either hoard or cut back production simultaneously across the board. And if that happens, then every one of those is going to fail in whatever their attempt is, whether it be we're going to cut back production, or we're going to increase our on-hand inventory, or we're going to increase our orders, or we're going to increase our orders by ordering through multiple distributors, or we're going to hoard toilet paper. Whichever way we do it, every one of those is going to make it worse for everybody else, and they will then double down on their strategies because everybody else is doing it. And you end up, like you said, Frank, you end up with this perfect storm, which is not technical making, it's people.
Yeah.
And as it happened, and then you start off with the just-in-time inventory. One of the reasons it's compelling in IT is because, and a friend of mine told me this like 30 years ago, which was the last time I had a friend, but she said the definition of obsolete in IT is, does it work? If it works, it's obsolete. So you already have an industry that doesn't want to have a huge on-hand supply of stuff that's already going to be obsolete. And I don't think there's going to be some really good write-ups in a couple of years. And I think there's going to be also some strategies in the distribution market that are going to be different ways of dealing with this and different ways of working with clients, because that's where we find the new business models.
Well, if you think about it, and you're absolutely right. And if you think about it, it's considered sort of old school distribution to think about, having a warehouse with 3 months of inventory, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. But, and there wasn't 3 months, but there was probably 45 days, let's say, of inventory when the pandemic hit. And that got everybody through like this first, period, right? And then what happened was, you say, well, what can the distributors do? Well, one of the things that they do is they've got long-standing valued relationships with every one of the vendors. So, I mean, they know how to work with the vendors. They know how to maximize what they can get. And they did that very quickly. So they did that in sort of so probably phase one was like, March, April, May, June of 20. And then when that, inventory started to dissipate and the demand started to increase because of all the work from home stuff, people were like, oh, geez, what, so now they started, really working very closely. And so, folks like, TD Synnex have had an HPE relationship for, 30 years, right? So they started working really closely and doing what they could. But at the end of the day, the whole thought process didn't take into account all the things that could happen. It's like when you're talking to your financial advisor and he says, well, over the past 50 years, the market's grown on average at, 6% a year and it'll continue like that. Well, okay, first of all, I don't care about 50 years. I care about 10, right? So what could happen in the next 10? And those are the kinds of things that I think we dealt with, Rich. So it'll get better. But I think the just-in-time piece, Bob is right. There's going to be a lot of studies done over the upcoming years saying, what the hell? What were we thinking?
And Frank, I wonder if, because you were talking about, I refer to those smaller guys, regardless of the channel, MSPs, distributors as boutique offerings.
Yeah.
Because you got to have that special value add. I wonder if there's going to be a new type of distributor that can cater to those organizations that want to have that Cadillac, if that's still the word to use, that Cadillac service, so that the just-in-time is not an issue. They maintain inventories, they maintain stock of critical, so that they can kind of offset some of that. I'd be curious if there's a new type of model that comes out.
Yeah, it really doesn't require a new one, Bob, because the existing ones are doing it, right? I mean, the existing ones are doing it. Now they're trying to do it as cost efficiently as they can, though, right? Because, subsidizing lots of days of inventory, in a warehouse typically is not conducive to the most profitable environment. But there's always been, and I've been with, as I said, IBM, Dell, Juniper, and more of a hardware environment, but there's always been 45 days of inventory, and usually 45 days kind of gets you through the period. It's just when you get unique situations, which we're in now, that you get impacted, right?
Frank, you talked a little bit about demand and how some of the demand that's out there is probably not real demand. And I was kind of thinking, because Bob mentioned toilet paper. How much of this is toilet paper demand? Like, you get people going out saying, well, I better buy 60 boxes of toilet paper because I may not get that. I may not have the opportunity later. So is there a little bit of hoarding going on in the demand?
Yeah, there's a little bit of, I've always called it shadow demand, guys, having dealt with it for years, when I was the IBM channel guy, and we would have these situations, what would happen is, all of your customers would put orders in. And so every vendor is looking at, their order book, and they're looking at, okay, I got all my routes to market, because every vendor has a hybrid, set of routes to markets. Every vendor has some percentage of the business goes direct to typically large enterprise customers. Some goes direct to large first tier solution providers like a CDW or an Insight or, folks like that. And then, the rest goes through Disti to the mass, the channel. And so there's an allocation process that would go on. And when you'd start looking at, and by the way, every solution provider in the marketplace who relies on distribution has at least 2 primary distributors they work with, and in many cases, relationships with 4, right? 3 or 4. And so when these types of things happen, the first thing a solution provider does is puts an order in with all of them. Because if one of them has it, I'll get it, right? So you can just go and look at that and say, well, geez, there has to be shadow demand there, right? And then when the supply starts to flow again, it becomes a little more natural. Now, that isn't to say that, there isn't primary relationships, because the way it works in the marketplace is, even though every solution provider has a relationship with 2 or 3, a buying relationship with 2 or 3 of the distributors, they usually rely on 1 or 2 to be their primary, right? And their go-to. So, Matt, I think that it's there. I don't think it's huge. I mean, 20%, 25%, somewhere in that range. I think it's there, but it flushes out pretty quick. In other words, as soon as supply starts coming back into the supply chain, it flushes itself out, and then, things will kind of revert back to, some semblance of normalcy.
So Frank, I'm going to set you up as sort of an advocate for distributors, if that's appropriate here. Because I mean, if you talk to resellers, you talk to solution providers or MSPs about distributors, any individual you talk to will say, I like this company a lot, I don't like that company, and I like that they do this thing, but I really hate that they do this other thing. Is there anything that the channel pros in the audience should sort of know and understand about distribution to better appreciate why the things they don't like happen? Is there any misconception or unfairness, maybe, in terms of how people view and talk about distributors?
Yeah, I think, it depends on, again, who you're talking to. So, I've had the experience of understanding it from the vendor, side, and knowing what I wanted a distributor to help me get done from the vendor side. And that was clearly to help satisfy my customers from, the largest, who are very obvious. And as I mentioned, in many cases, might buy direct, might have a single tier relationship, to supporting what we call the long tail, the small to very small solution providers that are satisfying that SMB space and helping us get to that space, right? And so depending on who you're talking to and what you're interested in, I think, the vendor community would say, I want the distributors to continue to be able to help me get to a set of customers efficiently and at scale that I can't get to myself, right? And that's been proven time after time after time that distribution can and will do that, right? The second thing is distribution manages those relationships, right? And so you think about it, when I was running the channel for IBM, and we had thousands of resellers I didn't want to transact business with thousands of resellers. I'd like distribution to do that. They do it better than I could do it by far. Now, conversely, one of the things you hear at times from the vendor community, depending on the size of the vendor and the influence, is, geez, I can't get their attention, right? I happen to be a smaller player, and I happen to be more of a niche player, and I need to have a little bit more presence. I need them to provide me a better level of support or attention. And the disties have heard that. And so what they've done over the years is they've broken up their sort of methodology of handling customers, into a category, if you will. So they've got folks that might be in the security category that are really small players, overall, but they're good size in the security category. And they needed to be able to do that in order to combat that, that concern. On the solution provider side, I think what the solution providers really have come to rely on is the consistency and the trust that they've been able to establish over the years with distribution. Because one of the things that has not happened and won't happen, in my opinion, is this conflict between distribution, sort of going to market to end users versus going to market through their customers, right? That hasn't happened. And that's one of the reasons why, the solution providers have trusted and valued what they provide. Now, what the solution providers will tell you, though, is you've got to keep evolving, and the disties have to keep making investments in order to support the business as it's changing. So I'll give you an example. One of the big things that's happening in the marketplace is the proliferation of, or the transition to consumption models. And, now it's not big right now. I mean, I think if you went and you talked to, a number of the vendors, they'd tell you if they would tell you, they'd tell you it's 7%, 8%, max 10% of their business, growing though. And that's a totally different way of doing business, right? I mean, that is that cannot be any more different than the old, I'm going to sell you a box. There's going to be margin attached to it. You're going to pay me. And then, it works in the traditional way. This is a different model. Well, with that different model comes significantly different requirements and challenges. So one of the challenges is the solution providers have to change the way they do business, because the way they capitalize their business has to change. Because all of a sudden, they're getting monthly invoices or monthly payments from their customers versus, the traditional methodology. Big change. They have to train their salespeople on how that, what changes that necessitates. Not that much different than the transition in the MSP space. When I ran a solution provider, we had about $100 million in traditional solution provider business and about $20 million in MSP business. And what was very clear is the folks that were the salespeople in the traditional business did not fit in the MSP space. Didn't understand it, couldn't get comfortable with it, didn't want anything to do with it. And, and even to the point where I would go out and make calls and we'd have a customer asking us, well, tell me what you do in this space. And the sales rep didn't want to talk about it. And I'm kicking them under the table saying, what the hell? How can you not? And afterwards, I realized that these guys were afraid of it. They just didn't. And so that's something you got to think about. So one of the services that the distributors are creating is educational services on how to make that transition and how to help the solution provider get through that transition. They've got some unique financing programs that'll help them, make the change, because it becomes a cash flow problem very quickly. So it's those types of things that the solution providers are asking the distributors to do. And so when I said the disties are having to make, big investments, all driven by the digital transformation, requirements, those are some of the things that I was referring to. Does that make sense, Rich? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of looping it back to that and how it kind of goes back to the very beginning of the interview, as we're talking about how distribution is always changing and adapting to fit the needs of MSPs. And that's why they're still very relevant, even maybe more so today than they ever have been, and will probably continue to be over the years. Frank, thank you so much for coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Battagliano, the CEO of the Global Technology Distribution Council, or GTDC, as we like to use abbreviations in this business. So why not have another one? Frank, thank you so much again for being on. It was very insightful, a lot of great information. For those who want to follow up with you, learn more about what you do, get in touch with the GTD. I can't even do it, man. The GTDC. Where can they find you? How can they do that?
Yeah, so F Battagliano at gtdc.org, and more importantly, gtdc.org, our website. You can log on. We've got, tell you all about our site, tell you who our members are, tell you who's on our board of directors, tell you all of that. But most importantly, we've got a knowledge hub. And in that knowledge hub, it contains, all the work that we're doing. So over the last couple of years, we've released, at least two to three research papers a year that talk about different, areas of the business, what's happening, why it's happening, what our view is. I do podcasts, a lot of these types of podcasts. Those are all, stored there. And just a lot of information that will help folks that are in the space understand, more about it. So
fantastic. We'll make sure that we include those links in our show notes page for episode 215. So folks, go there to ChannelProNetwork.com, find those links. If you're on your phone, open up the description area there on your phone. Usually the links will show up there. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button and the subscribe button, but you can pop open the description there on YouTube and you'll find all the links there as well. Frank, thank you again so much for being on. It was a delight having you on. I hope we have you back again in the future. And with that, we're going to take a short break. Bob Coppedge will join us on the other side for a little bit of fun and to wrap up the show. You don't want to miss that. Stick around. We will be right back. And we are back with part 3 of ChannelPro Weekly. Wow, Rich, the interview went a little long, but it was jam-packed, full of great information. What an insight into the distributor world than what Frank Battagliano has rattling around inside of his brain. Pretty amazing stuff. Anything you want to highlight or take away from that interview, Rich?
Just that off the air a short time ago, Bob and I were kind of talking about the fact that this whole pandemic supply chain crunch, this is not the first time that we've watched the just-in-time model crater, basically. Because as I was listening to Frank, I was kind of thinking to myself, boy, just a few years ago, there was that whole thing where Intel suddenly, they had kind of misjudged what the demand was going to be for their chips, and all of a sudden nobody could get processors and nobody could get PCs. And I was talking to channel pros who, for the first time maybe ever in some cases, were actually stockpiling inventory. Ordinarily, you don't want, stuff sitting around collecting dust on your shelf, but people who could not meet customer demand for new PCs were kind of stockpiling stuff, so they never had that situation again. And Bob, you remembered even further back another situation where that just in time it looks good until this happens, and then it's a problem.
Yeah, in that case, it was volcanoes that were interfering with the delivery of hard drives. I think the SSD drives, if I remember specifically, but I could be wrong on that one. It was about 10, 15 years ago. Yeah,
and having a processor is better than having no processor, even if it's 6 months old, right? Sometimes maybe having a little bit on hand to meet that is not a bad thing. Bob, anything you want to highlight from that interview?
No, I love the challenges that, because we've all got this just-in-time mentality burned in our head since the 80s, because I'm old. Frankie alluded to his age too. Where it has served us so well by having as little on-hand inventory as possible. And everything about the last 2 years has really turned the safety of that mentality upside down. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of that.
Yeah, I agree. Very interesting stuff. Very cool. And a big thanks again to Frank Battagliano for joining us and having that interview. It was really good. Rich, I know we've got a little bit of extra time. Why don't we have a little bit of round of 5 questions with our guest, Mr. Bob Coppedge. Bob, you up for a little game of 5 questions?
I was hoping for 4, but okay, 5.
It's going to be 5, and sometimes a little more than that, depending on how carried away we get. But for those who are maybe new to the show, 5 questions is a game we put with some of our wonderful guests, where Rich and I will come up with questions to ask Bob on the fly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back and forth. The shtick is that I guarantee they will be off topic, and Rich and I cannot write them in advance. We have to think of them on the fly. So it often gets ridiculous and fun. So strap in, folks. It's gonna be good. Rich, question number 1 to you.
Okay, so Bob, you tried stand up, didn't appeal to you much, but do you have a favorite comedian?
George Carlin, absolutely. His use of the language and his analytical skills were absolutely ridiculously brilliant. I will give a second to Robin Williams because his improv skills, if you ever want to hear a description of golf that is not safe for work, YouTube Robin Williams and golf. And the third one I will give you is probably the one you haven't heard of, and that's Tom Lehrer, who was actually a math professor in California and also at Harvard. And in the 1950s, he made extra money by playing piano at bars. And he's written some of and he wrote about drugs. He wrote about, nasty songs about Boy Scouts, about nuclear proliferation. Absolutely, absolutely brilliant. He was a pretty good piano player too. So 3.
He was temporarily, he was for a time in the 1960s, right around the time I was born. He was huge. Yeah. And then he just kind of disappeared.
He retired. He basically just became a full-time professor. He gave up on the music stuff. He had This Was the Week That Was, which was a PBS show in the 60s, and then actually wrote some songs for the Electric Company, which started around the same time Sesame Street did. It's a fascinating guy.
Very interesting. You brought up Robin Williams, and one thing that I read about Robin Williams that I found fascinating is that he was in the movie The Princess Bride. I'm sure we've all seen that at some point. He kind of had a small role in that. But for the people who were there on set, they said that watching Robin Williams work was fascinating because all of everything that he did in The Princess Bride is all improv. And they said that they shot that scene in his hut over 2 days. And they're like, he came up with medieval jokes on the fly for 2 days straight. And he never said the same thing twice between takes. And it took so long to get there because the actor, I'm trying to remember the actor's name who played the main hero of that. Whatever his name was, they had to get there because he was supposed to be dead on the table, and he kept bursting out into laughter because of Robin Williams and his craziness that he was talking about and all the jokes he was making. Fascinating story. All right, question number 2. So you did theater for a long time, and anybody who's done community theater knows that it's a lot of work. And so you have your big production, you do your thing. What would you do to celebrate after your debut theater production?
Actually, I don't celebrate. It's not my skill set. So essentially, it's one of those where if you're doing improv when you're on, it is incredibly emotionally and energetically draining, but in a fantastic way. And then what I want to do is get the heck away from every human being on the planet as quickly as possible for a short period of time. Because like I said, and this gets back to the whole Asperger's thing we talked about earlier, but not in a bad way. So it really is just a relax, chill, wind down and move on.
Very cool. Rich, question number 3 to you.
So I'm going to go back to comedy here because there's a podcast that I listen to pretty regularly where they interview comedians about their work and so on. And there's this sort of standard list of questions that they go through at the end of every episode. And one of the questions that these comedians always get asked is, do you have a favorite joke? Like not something you've written and performed, but just a joke that you've heard and like to tell. Do you have a favorite joke?
I'll tell you one that is kind of IT oriented, and I'm lousy at telling jokes because I can't remember the exact script to use. Okay, so which is why improv works well for me, but regular theater not so much. There was a CEO who went to a county fair and was going to take a ride in a hot air balloon. And he got into the balloon, but before the guy who was going to go with him could get in, the balloon became loose and started drifting away with the CEO. Well, it started, and the guy was originally panicked because, he's in this balloon going nowhere. And then it ended up going over this park area, and there was no people around and all that. It was kind of cool, but I was getting a little concerned. So he saw one person hiking down below, and he yelled out, "Hey, can you help me? I don't know where I am." And the guy looked up and said, "You're above me about 30 feet, and you're in a hot air balloon." And the guy said, "You must be in IT." "Yeah, I am. How did you know?" "Because I asked you a straight question, and the data you gave me in response was absolutely accurate, was on time, it was perfect, and absolutely no use to me whatsoever." And the guy said, "You must be an executive." I said, "I am. How did you know?" And he goes, "Because I'm the guy sitting down here trying to answer your questions. You're the idiot who got lost in a hot air balloon, but somehow you're pissed at me for the whole thing."
That is a great IT joke. I don't hear too many.
It is.
That is a good one. That is a good one. I got, I will share an IT joke. I keep it up here on my desk because I found it very, very humorous. And it's actually a Dilbert cartoon in my Dilbert calendar that I got years and years and years ago. And I saved this one. And here it is right here. And I will read it to you. So it's basically Dilbert and his boss having a short conversation. And Dilbert says, "You'll like this." The boss says, "I had to lay off 7 engineers and I need you to pick up those functions." And Dilbert says, "Wow, I feel a weight has been lifted from my chest. Now that my failure is guaranteed, I no longer feel the stress of trying to succeed. I don't know how to thank you for this." And his boss goes, "This didn't go the way I had hoped." That's one of my favorite IT jokes because, it could kind of go with any engineering kind of job, but I found that one pretty funny. All right, question number 4 to me. So comedy is very subjective, and humor, things that people find humorous is subjective. But what is your favorite comedy movie?
It depends. If you're looking at it in terms of mechanically, Airplane. Airplane is just such a they got everything right. And most people think it's a takeoff on the original Airline or airline disaster movies. There was actually a movie, I think it was called 0 Hour. But it was a movie that was done in the 1950s that has the exact same plot as Airplane. And there are some scenes that are shot for shot, almost exactly identical. The guys who did Airplane actually bought rights to the script and then changed it and absolutely made that brilliant. That would be my first one. My second one would be Young Frankenstein. Because Gene Wilder, who primarily wrote it, and Mel Brooks basically wanted to do a comedy that both was an homage to the Universal Frankenstein movies of the 30s, and yet totally make fun of them, but without being condescending to the movies or to the genre. And they succeeded just absolutely brilliantly. If you loved the movie, if you loved the original Frankenstein movies, but don't like comedy, you'd still love the movie. And if you never saw a Frankenstein movie, you'd still find it funny. And technically, that is ridiculously hard to do. So,
for sure, I love Mel Brooks. Actually, most of his movies I think are awesome and funny. That's definitely my vein of humor. Rich, question number 5 to you.
You know what? You provided an awesome example of this before, and so I'm going to see if you maybe have another one. Something that you learned from improv comedy that has made you better in business, better at life, like a principle that you apply beyond just improv.
Well, I think it's first of all, it's the collaborative premise. The fact that we are all here to make this a better experience, however you want to define that. And that better experience, whether it be the participants or the audience. And I get back to the example I would always use, and I probably used it if you asked me this before, is if you watched a tennis or a ping pong game, back when China, they had this great Chinese American teams where they just had these ridiculously great ping pong players, but they weren't trying to beat each other. They were trying to just make incredible shots and set each other up for incredible shots. I love comedy and I love improv to be able to do that. And especially when we're talking about co-managed IT, how can I make the internal IT people look better to their boss? What are the softball questions? What's the coaching I can give them? Not so it's scripted, because that comes off, everybody knows that and doesn't do us any good. But how can I coach and work with them in such a way that the CEO is going to go, our IT is fantastic, and it's because of this team that we've assembled. And when you think about co-manage from that standpoint, it is collaborative and it is demonstrable by engaging everybody to make those points. And I'll get back to the example that's often used, where an internal IT person is saying, we got to move to the cloud, we got to move to the cloud, we got to move to the cloud. And the CEO is like, whatever. Then a consultant comes in out of nowhere and says, you should move to the cloud. And the CEO is like, why didn't you ever have that idea, you lousy piece of internal IT? Because that's what they call them. And they're like, what? And so for us to be able to say, we're never going to let that happen to you. When we bring in an idea, it's going to be ours. And we're going to talk about it. So
very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for playing along. Always good to learn a little bit more about our awesome guests. And I guess, Rich, we'll say goodbye to Bob here in a second, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what we might have missed and what might be coming up next week?
Well, every week, if you want to catch up on things you might have missed, a great way to do that is to go to channelpronetwork.com and check out our In Case You Missed It post. It goes up there every Friday. It's from our own James Gaskin. And this week, James is going to be talking about some new products from Nutanix, a interesting partnership between Uplevel Systems, which is one of these IT management vendors that we don't probably talk about as much as we ought to, but they're working now with a security vendor named Transmosis on something that's kind of interesting in the security as a service realm for SMBs. It's backed by $1 million liability insurance account. It's kind of interesting there. And then James is going to offer his thoughts on something you may or may not have heard of, which is that you can no longer apparently buy Teslas with the ability to generate the sound of passing gas, let's say. And he'll explain the whole thing for you, why that happened and what he thinks about that. And then in terms of what's coming up next week, a number of different things actually are happening next week. So the folks at Nerdio are doing their, I think it's their first in-person partner event. It's called NerdioCon. They are doing it in Cancun, Mexico. And because I will do anything for a story, folks, I am there for you. I'm going to go to Cancun and cover the story for you because I care. And then Threatwalker is doing its Zero Trust World event in Orlando next week. Adigi, which makes an IT management tool for the Apple ecosystem, they're doing a virtual partner event called Adigi Innovate. And I think I'll just say, without saying, could be some news coming from any or all of those events as well. So it looks to be a busy week.
Bob, how much do you think?
I'll throw in the fact that my tech director is going to be at NerdioCon in Mexico, and my tech and my security czar is going to be in Florida. I'm going to be here in Northeast Ohio because I, unlike you, Rich, am an idiot.
I was how much arm twisting do you think it took for Rich to take that assignment to go to Cancun? Probably not much is going to be my guess. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Coppedge, the CEO and founder of Simplex IT. Bob, it's always a pleasure having you on. It really, really, really is.
Oh, this is one of my favorites, so this is fun.
That's good. I'm glad you had a good time. I cannot wait till we get you back on. And I'm next time I'm in your neck of the woods in Ohio, because I'm also in the Midwest. I will definitely look you up, and we're going to go do something because it'll be a blast.
Cool.
By the way, for folks who want to follow you, learn more about Simplex IT, hit you on the socials, email you, where can they find you?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about Simplex IT, simplex-it.com. If you want to see some of our marketing stuff that we do, LinkedIn is where we push most of our videos and the like. If you want to learn more about co-managed IT, there's actually a co-managed IT services Facebook group that I run that has about 1,500 MSP members.
Fantastic. And we'll put the links to all of those places in the show notes for them to discover. And where can you find the show notes, folks? ChannelProNetwork.com is the place you should be going each and every day, because there you'll find the latest news, articles, white papers, resources, downloads, stuff that will help you make more money, do your job better, or keep you up to date on what's going on in the industry. Make it your homepage. Go there each and every day. And of course, subscribe to Channel Pro Weekly. We're on all the podcast places, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you are. Subscribe there and take us with you wherever you go, and have us talking to your brain each and every day. If you'd like to watch, we are on YouTube. We encourage you to subscribe there. Leave a comment. That always helps. And hit the bell so you get notifications, and be a part of the show there as well. We're on all the socials. Find us there, Channel Pro Network, on pretty much everywhere. We're at Channel Pro SMB on Twitter if you want to follow us there. And with that, we are going to say goodbye to Bob Coppedge. A big thanks to Frank Battagliano for joining us as well. A goodbye to Rich Freeman, who we will see next week in Cancun, apparently. How did I not get the opportunity for this one? I don't know. I'm going to file a formal complaint, which we will discuss next week. Until then, folks, see you then.